there's this weird thing that happens with all video game economies. It doesn't matter whether you're dealing with a more traditional economy involving buying low, selling high, and balancing your finances, or a more video gamey one involving mana, ammunition, time itself, or just a small mountain of cowhide. Eventually, that economy is going to crumble before your eyes. Sometimes, that's because the economy in question is too generous. The Horizon games have this great system where you make all your ammo out of monster parts and you tip your primary arrows with metal shards, which also serve as your money. It's awesome, but sooner or later, you get so many materials that you can just make an infinite amount of whatever you want, and any interesting choices this system provides just evaporate. And in the Pokemon games, you get given so much experience that if you're remotely diligent about fighting trainers, you quickly become massively overleveled, and the game becomes so easy that it's just boring. Other times, economies are too stingy, forcing you down the dark path of grinding. Many old school RPGs will stick a big difficulty wall in front of you until you go out into the woods and spend an hour beating up goblins until you're strong enough to start having fun. And way too many games with survival mechanics seem to accidentally make by far the most boring bits of gameplay, gathering and making the same thing over and over again, by far the most efficient strategy. And sometimes, game economies just end up in this weird state where stuff that used to be really important just sort of becomes obsolete as time goes on. Diablo 2 famously gave players so much money that gold coins became functionally worthless as a currency, and players started bartering in rings like savages instead. Long story short, video game economies are weird and very fragile. Whether you've got too much stuff or not enough, whether a game's too lax with its currencies or too restrictive, digital economies often start out with a lot of promise, but even under cursory examination, seem to fall apart as dominant strategies quickly emerge and a bunch of potentially interesting options and playstyles just fall by the wayside. Why does this happen? Why do all game economies seem to crumble and reveal some sort of exploit or optimal strategy sooner or later? Well, for a long time, I thought the reason was that there was some sort of secret solution that game designers were just missing, and that if you balanced the numbers right and used the right mechanics, you could make a digital economy that self-balanced and sustained itself just as well as the real-life economy. Or, you know, maybe better. Unfortunately, after a bit of research, I've come to the conclusion that I was dead wrong in multiple respects. The reality is that all video game economies are broken. Yep, fundamentally. Even the fun ones. In fact, especially the fun ones. Just like how combat systems don't accurately simulate real-life warfare, but abstract it, video game economic systems are designed primarily to be fun to engage with, for the player to be able to come out ahead with a bit of skill, and to be comprehensible without a degree, not to accurately model a real economy, which is none of those things. So, because all video game economic systems, even the really complicated ones you find in MMOs, are by necessity much simpler than real-life economies, they're going to be much more vulnerable to exploitation. For example, if random old monsters in an RPG didn't drop loot or experience points, then there'd be literally no reason to fight the vast majority of enemies, and players would lack that nice drip feed of rewards that keeps them interested. However, the presence of monster loot also opens up the potential for players to just farm them forever and grind down a bunch of money, robbing themselves of the fun they were supposed to be having. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. Designing and balancing an economy is just as much to do with behaviour as it is to do with numbers, and gaming economic systems are maybe the truest example of this. As the great Soren Johnson said, given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game, and the inherent weaknesses in most, if not all, video game economies provide massive, potentially destructive incentives to play a certain way. From infinitely respawning resources, to dumb NPC merchants, and a lack of anything even approaching taxation, or a reason not to hoard a million hearty radishes in your infinite refrigerated pockets, it's hard not to be tempted to abuse a video game economy. And unfortunately, while loads of games have tried to fight players' natural instinct to take advantage of powerful strategies by introducing carry limits, limited merchant inventories, and item degradation, they're usually not very successful, either making it just more boring to do the same overpowered tactics, or actually introducing new vulnerabilities. Famously, Fallout New Vegas' weapon repair mechanic, designed to keep powerful guns in check, actually let you use worthless junk to keep rare guns with intentionally low durability in tip-top shape, making them way stronger than intended. So instead, I think the best way to fix this big problem with video game economies gradually falling to bits isn't to try and restrict players, but to lean into this optimizational instinct by making the most fun strategy also the one that takes the best advantage of an inherently flawed economic system. The simplest way that games can leverage their economies to encourage particular behavior is by fiddling with the relative prevalence or scarcity of particular resources or currencies. Limiting resources, stuff that's rare or precious, we naturally highly value, and as such we'll go out of our way to spend this stuff efficiently and acquire more by any means necessary. Surplus resources or currencies, on the other hand, function in the opposite way. Players will use them liberally, but equally don't really want to go out of their way to acquire more because they're so common. Ammo is a great way of demonstrating this effect, because it's a resource you constantly spend just by playing the game, and it's something the player is constantly aware of. So, in the newer Doom games, ammo is incredibly plentiful. You'll almost never actually completely run out because it's lying around all over the place. And you can also just chainsaw it out of enemies. What this means is that combat becomes less about efficient use of each shot and more about matching the right gun to each enemy, befitting Doom's more hectic feel. In Doom Eternal, the devs actually removed the infinite ammo backup pistol from the previous game because a lot of players ended up overusing it and trying to play efficiently and save ammo when they didn't actually need to, which ended up with them having less fun for no reason. On the flip side, games with scarce ammo make each use of this limited resource feel impactful and pushes players to consider whether every shot is worth it. Immersive sims often do this stuff really well. In the OG Deus Ex and Dishonored, for example, the tranquilizer crossbow is basically the best way of dealing with baddies non-violently, but the ammo is rare, so you have to think really carefully about which problem guys you want to deal with easily and which you think you can take care of with a lovely sleepy hug instead. However, developers do need to be careful with this sort of stuff. Sometimes limited resources can end up discouraging the exact situation they want us to be getting into in the first place. In Signalis, a survival horror game that I mostly really like, ammo is incredibly rare for obvious reasons. Tense resource management combat is really fun, but because you don't want to waste ammo, avoiding combat outright and just sort of running away from the spooky robo-zombies becomes a very good ammo saving strategy, meaning that you also end up avoiding the reason why ammo is so rare in the first place. This is also a problem that RTS games have learned to deal with. In games with an infinite or very large reserve of cash and harvestable resources, players often end up just turtling in their base and refusing to interact with their opponents because they've got no real incentive to leave their home turf. Not only is this not very fun, because these players rarely actually have a fair fight, it's also not a powerful strategy, because turtles aren't making the most of the potential resources outside their super castle. So how could developers encourage players to act more aggressively and make better use of the economic strategies available? Simple. They made money in your starting base run out. In StarCraft, mineral veins run dry, in Command & Conquer, fields of ore become less and less efficient to mine from, and in Dune Spice Wars, taxes keep increasing, forcing you to expand to new spice fields before you piss off the space government. The result of turning money from a surplus resource into a limited resource is that players now feel a pressure to get as much as possible as quickly as they can, and in the process, expanding their territory towards their opponent and building more units thanks to the increased income. This ultimately leads to more interactive, more aggressive gameplay, which is where the RTS shines. Of course, it's not just the player's attitude towards individual resources and currencies that determines their relationship with an economy as a whole. Any economic system is going to be made out of multiple elements, and the way all of those variables are structured is a huge determining factor in how us players end up trying to crack things open, for better or for worse. Take economies structured around money as a central currency, for example. It, by nature, is an all-purpose resource that can be exchanged for everything from goods to services to bonus Patreon rewards. It represents abstract buying power, and this flexibility makes it very powerful, but also very dangerous. Often, games that give money too much prevalence end up with players ignoring 90% of the game because raw cash solves all their problems. Look at Souls-like games like Elden Ring, for example. Everything from increasing your stats to upgrading items to buying basically any other resource ultimately requires runes, meaning that there's often little incentive to spend time crafting rare consumables or finding some cool new weapon that might turn the tables, because that time will be better spent just murdering these dumb frogs over and over again and brute forcing your way through the game by sheer weight of finance. Orienting an economy around a single currency with every other resource feeding into it will all but ensure a player focuses on that specific element of the game above everything else. But this needn't be a negative. Look at Persona 5, a game in which you play as a regular teenage boy who leads a regular double life as a psychic criminal when he's not in school. Regardless of how you want to play Persona, you have to do so via the time management element. So that means that story-focused players, players who like the battling, and players who just want to kiss the best character, until they realise that the game won't let you kiss Yusuke or Akechi because the game's creators are homophobes, and it won't let you kiss Sai either because they have no taste, and so you end up settling for one of the game's boring tradwai... Wait, where was I going with this? Oh, right, because of Persona's central time economy, all players are incentivized to play with the most fun part of the game, its characters. So, in Persona 5, All the best stuff, from cool passive abilities to cheap access to powerful items and brand new moves, are gated behind leveling up your relationship with the game's NPCs, and in order to make friends with characters, you need to spend time with them. Creating this fun series of choices where you have to balance each character's schedule and which bonuses you want, all under a limited time frame. The game then builds on this by requiring that you level up your social skills to gain access to higher levels of a confidant's relationship, or even start making friends with them at all. Makoto, for example, won't even talk to you unless you have rank 3 knowledge, and leveling that stuff up also costs time. This is also where money comes in. Rather than being the be-all end-all fundamental element of the economy, money in Persona 5 is a flexible resource that you can spend to use your limited time more efficiently. You can pay to have this creepy maid do chores for you, you can buy gifts for people which give a lot of friendship points quickly, or you could buy books, movies and games, all of which allow you to rank up your social stats more quickly. And how do you get money? You got it, you've got to spend time by going to the metaverse and killing some NFTs. By anticipating the fact that a central currency creates a massive economic weakness, and using this to the game's advantage, Persona 5 both removes grinding as a possibility because making friends is more efficient, and also funnels players towards the best bits of the game in one fell swoop. It is great. Of course, games don't need to have a single central currency at the heart of their economy, and a more open structure can give the player a great feeling of control, which only makes breaking the economy wide open more fun. In Off-World Trading Company, for example, which treats money as more of a win condition than a core resource, the game instead becomes all about setting up monopolies on key resources, sabotaging opponents' production chains, and manipulating the stock market to your advantage, with the most lucrative strategies involving crazy adjacency bonuses or big building projects testing your logistics and planning skills instead of your ability to just rack up loads of cash. When laxer, more open economic structures run awry though, games can often lose a sense of integrity because players could easily just ignore bits of the economy and still get what they want. This is really obvious in some survival games, where the lack of trading or converting items into a currency you care about means that a lot of materials, and food items in particular, go completely ignored because there's literally no reason to engage with them over the mathematically superior choices. This happens in roguelikes too, where the ability to collect currencies that increase your power from run to run render all other resources worthless because they're the only ones that tie into a broader economic framework. Hades actually fixes this quite well now that I mention it. Each half of its currency system appear in separate pools, so they never directly compete, and there are various late game bonuses you can get for picking up permanent resources. So even if you've, say, already made friends with everyone, picking up Nectar of the Gods still gives you some sort of in-game bonus in the form of a boon level, so it doesn't feel totally worthless. This actually brings me onto another way that game economies quote-unquote break that can really help them feel like more than an unfeeling set of numbers, and that's resources changing in value over time. And by that I don't just mean monetary value, but their importance to the player as well. In a lot of games, inflation or poor planning mean that some resources, like money in an MMO or experience points when you're at max level, lose their value and you suddenly have no incentive to engage with vast swathes of a given economy. But by deliberately baking in these moments where certain resources or currencies increase or drop off in value, games can create some really cool gameplay. Frostpunk does this really well. Early on in the game, wood is incredibly important for building houses so your people don't freeze, but as the game goes on, buildings start requiring more and more steel. So you've got some interesting decisions to make in how hard you want to invest in shoring up your early game foundations, but potentially having a bunch of worthless wood in the late game, versus speccing into steel early, but having some growing pains as a result. Additionally, you could fix your wood surplus by researching charcoal burners, turning it into coal, but this puts pressure on your available workforce, which becomes tighter and tighter as people start dying towards the mid-game. Basically, your changing relationship with this resource actually makes the economy more interesting as the criteria for optimal play changes too. When games have a kind of static economy, and your valuation of each constituent part never has to change, it can often feel like the game is stagnant, and you're just repeating the same gameplay choices but with different currencies and resources. Moonlighter really felt like this to me, where every dungeon and every item just kind of blended into one because their relative values are always the same. Everything has a fixed in-game cost, items from later dungeons always supersede older ones, and there's no incentive to craft anything outside of the one weapon and armor path you like best, meaning that knowing what to keep and what to sell isn't really much of a challenge, and knowing the best price for each item is always just a matter of doing some basic maths. This leads to economic systems that feel sluggish and undynamic, not just because you've optimized the economy, but because you only have to do it once. In a different, better economics game on the other hand, like Potionomics, these kinds of calculations are constantly changing. For one, lower tier ingredients are sometimes really useful, not just for balancing out potion component ratios, but also for imparting specific traits onto your brews, increasing their overall value or making them eligible for lucrative custom orders. Not only that, but the kind of ingredients you need changes over time too. In week 2 of the game, the best adventuring locations open to you, the Mushroom Mire and the Bone Wastes, need you to make poison and fire resistance potions for your adventurers if you want them to survive, and both of those require both red and yellow mana to make, massively increasing the value of ingredients with both of these qualities. But by the time week 4 rolls around, and all 3 of the competition potions that you need to brew to beat this adorable cat lady require purple mana, your internal valuation totally changes, and the most efficient path forward changes too, introducing a bunch more fun optimization to figure out. It's not just management-y games where this happens either. Minecraft's crafting economy changes over time too, and it helps to lend an otherwise very simplistic game an incredibly compelling arc of increasing power. Wood's value is relatively stable because you always need it for torches and arrows, stone drops off dramatically once you can make better tools, iron slowly depreciates as you get more and more diamonds, but they're too rare for armor, so iron always has some use, and gold spikes up from worthless to crucial right at the endgame because you need it to make top tier netherite gear. By the end of the game, you can look back on when you thought a stone pick was a major milestone, or when you had to and ah about how best to use your first diamonds, and feel like you've actually made some tangible progress in a way that would be impossible if the economy actually functioned more like, well, an economy. And that's kind of my point. The closest games really get to creating a realistic economy is in an MMO, and that's because real people are way better at modelling market forces than NPCs. But equally, this usually makes their economies the least fun in all of video gaming. In most MMOs, almost nothing players can craft has any actual value, making it this massive money sink. Anything remotely scarce costs an arm and a leg, and the only way to get any sort of foot in the door is to get on the boring, menial daily grind, or farm stuff so that a rich player can skip the effort of having to work for the items themselves. Even in games like EVE Online, which has arguably video gaming's most realistic economy, including a core currency literally backed by the dollar, the economic systems aren't very fun either. Despite the cool stories of corporate intrigue and big space wars you might hear about, everything in EVE is owned by massive cartels of players, and just like in real life, people with more real money have a distinct advantage, because they can just buy in-game currency and outcompete you. What this means is that the only real path towards wealth for regular people is essentially becoming an employee of one of the big player-owned corporations. It's either that or become a space criminal, which is so unreliable so as to be basically gambling. And I don't know about you, but that hits a little bit too close to home for my liking. The real economy is stressful, restrictive, and disempowering by design. At best, it's a ruthlessly efficient machine designed to encourage humans to be as productive as possible regardless of how much fun they're having or how much control they feel like they have, and at worst, it's a rigged system where the only way to succeed is to be astronomically lucky or to already be rich. With that in mind, is it any wonder why video games don't try very hard to replicate real economics? In video games, the very fact that we don't play with a properly balanced economy kept in check by teams of financial experts that isn't concerned with long-term stability allows us to wield influence and explore opportunities that real life never would have given us. I think this is what makes video games that model the not fun elements of real economies such effective tools for creating evocative experiences. In Diaries of a Spaceport Janitor, you aren't just being shown someone working a menial, degrading job in the hopes of making their way out of poverty, you have to put your own face to the grindstone and try to get by because there are no easy alternatives. Citizen Sleeper's main premise is that you play as a cyborg who's dependent on a pharmaceutical drug produced by the corporation that built you, and if you don't take it regularly, you die, meaning that you have to do horrible manual labor, commit crimes, and avoid eating to save cash in order to ward off death for another few days. And in Hard Space Shipbreaker, you're highly incentivized to rush, take risks, and play fast and loose with safety checks to dismantle ships as fast as possible, because it's by far the most efficient way to play in terms of raw cash, and your massive debt is only going to keep piling up. Even in games that aren't trying to make grand social critiques, this stuff can still create some really cool moments. In Fallout New Vegas, one of the DLCs, accurately called Dead Money, has a recurring theme of letting go, and encourages you to leave behind the stack of incredibly heavy, super valuable gold bars found at the end in order to escape an exploding vault. But if the player cheeses the game and keeps the bars anyway, they get a hollow victory, because the gold bars are so expensive so as to be basically useless. No merchant except the gunrunners can cover the cost of even one of the multiple bars, and if you're good enough for the game to have got the bars anyway, then chances are you don't need anything the gunrunners sell, leaving you with all the riches in the world weighing you down and nothing to spend them on, which is a very fun way of reinforcing the DLC's core theme. Whether we like it or not, we're all beholden to the whims of one or more economies. But in video games, average people get the chance to tip the odds in their favour for once, and that's why stopping gaming economies from being broken, if it was even possible, wouldn't actually fix them at all. Because ultimately, they're not really supposed to be balanced. It's also what makes exploitative, microtransaction-y nonsense so infuriating. By linking a pretend video game economy, which is ostensibly supposed to be fun, to the real world one, which definitely isn't, not only is there a massive perverse incentive for developers to make real-world transactions the only viable means of playing, but also, it's impossible to view games no matter how fun in the same way when your limited time has a literal dollars and cents value associated with it. So maybe, what we really need is a change in perspective. Video game economies don't start off broken, it's our duty as players to break them, and it's the developer's job to structure the fault lines and strategic weaknesses in an economy such that they'll break in the right way once they collide with their audience. Which is to say that I think we can all take a few real-life lessons from how video games handle their economies. Whether that's conserving ammo, selling loot, or most importantly of all, giving a hot nerd cactuses over and over again until she falls in love with you. Trust me, it works every time. Welcome, come in from the cold, yes, it's the after the video segment. Huddle up and warm yourself against my gentle rambling about random bullshit that I think you should be made aware of. Is that what I do at the end of every video? Yes. Why is me doing that suddenly warm? Not sure. Am I writing this at 4 in the morning? Oh, how could you tell? Anyway, as I often tend to do around this time of year, I like to point people in the direction of a personal favourite charity cause of mine that's also relevant to you video gamers. And that is the Yogscast Charity Jingle Jam Bundle, a massive pack of games with all the proceeds going to charity. Some highlight inclusions are The Hex, Little Inferno, which just had an update, Plate Up, Tenderfoot Tactics, Age of Wonders Planetfall, Absolute Drift, and also a bunch of other games that I've not even played. It's great value, it's a great cause, and if you're watching this after the bundle is over, the charities are open all year, so you've got no excuse not to give them a look anyway. Of course, there is another charity case that's near and dear to my heart, and that is the Architect of Games Patreon, keeping me fed, in house and home, and able to make weirdo nonsense videos like this one. It's not a one-sided relationship though. People who support me on Patreon get all sorts of bonus goodies, like early access to videos, some behind-the-scenes content, and my extra bonus ramblings that didn't make it into the final cut. Supporting the channel on Patreon is by far the best way to ensure these videos keep happening, and that's why, in addition to all the other stuff, I like to give a special shout out to my top-tiered supporters, who, let's face it, are just a little bit cooler and slightly better looking than the rest of you. And those handsome people are Algebrut, Ali Wright, Asaran, Auna94, Bardic Dragoon, Brennan Spalding, Brian Notariani, Konstantin Amend, Cosmix360, Daniel Medjes, Das Kangaroo, David Setzer, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Digletier, Dotwo, Ekton, Edward Franklin Woods, Eugene Bulkin, Gazkul, ISAW Dano, Iofer93, Jacob Dylan Riddle, Jordan Gear, Justin Dent, Lee Berman, MaceWindow54, NWDD, Nate Graff, Patrick Romberg, Peter D. Tomasak, Phoenix Thurikaz, Reddidex, Regal Regex, Ray's Dad, Rajigar, Sheldon Hearn, Simon Jacobson, Sir Snakespeare, Steve Riley, Strateger in Ultima, The Forbidden Shrimp, Tin Markovic, Ty Gurin, Teakhorn, Tyler Duncan, Uprising, Whimsical Wisp, Zach Grendel, and Chow. Apologies to some people on the list who should have gotten a shout out ages ago but haven't. That's my bad. The Patreon interface for this stuff is not very good and I didn't check it very well. Anyway, that's it, that's all for me. I've been working on one final regular video before we get started on the end of year extravaganza, so hopefully there's going to be time for that. So I better get to work, which means that I will see you then. Bye!